Welcome to the Space and Time Getting Started Guide. In this video, we're going to walk through all the steps from downloading, installing the Space and Time CLI, registering a new account, running queries, creating tables, inserting data, and then joining that data with existing on-chain data in Space and Time. This guide is primarily targeted at developers. There's a number of different ways that you can access Space and Time. The first is going to be our dApp. The dApp is a really easy way to jump in and just start looking at what's there and running queries. However, if you are a developer and you're going to integrate Space and Time into your application or build around Space and Time, this is probably a good place for you to get started. We do also have a JDBC driver that's worth mentioning that allows you to directly connect to the database and run queries and things from there. Let's go ahead and jump into the docs and look at the Getting Started guide. Before we download the Space and Time CLI, we're going to talk about two pieces of important information. We've got the API URL and we've got the join code. The API URL is simply the URL that you're going to use to access Space and Time. You can get that from the welcome email, and the join code will also come in the welcome email. This is what is going to link you up to your subscription or your organization that you're attached to. You can sign up for Space and Time without a join code. There is a limit on the number of queries you can run before you'll get kind of throttled back and some of the features that are available. All right, let's take a look at the actual setup of the Space and Time CLI. I'd like to mention that the CLI is actually just a wrapper around the API. So this is just a Java application you can run from the command line to perform a number of key tasks associated with Space and Time. So the first thing you need to do is install the Java JDK. For this current version, the latest is going to be good, Java 20. I'm not going to walk through the actual install, but for me on Apple Silicon, I would grab the ARM64 DMG, download that, and install Java. What we will do is take a look at the next step here and what you can do to ensure that you've properly installed Java. Once it's installed, that command will let you know that you're able to access it as needed from the command line. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is grab the Space and Time CLI jar file. This is just a compiled Java file that we can use to access the API. You can see here there's going to be a number of different versions available. Currently, the most recent version is our 0.03. I would recommend grabbing the newest, whatever it may be. And you want the actual jar file, not the POM. Initiate the download there. And what we're going to do is take the jar file and we're just going to execute it first to confirm that everything is working as expected. So here's the command itself. We just simply need to run Java with the jar flag pointed at the jar itself. First things I'm going to do is grab that file and drop it over here. And now we'll go ahead and run that file with a little helpo. That just pops open the help menu, and what this does is let us know that we have successfully executed the jar file using Java. Now, We could just get along with using it this way. However, the recommended way to move forward is to set an alias in your shell. And this is where we'll have to branch out depending on the operating system that you're running. So if you are on Windows, Linux, Mac, the process for creating an alias is a little different. The end result is essentially the same. When we're done with this step, you'll simply be able to type SxT CLI and access that same Java file. On OS X, it's generally going to be simply a matter of editing the ZSHRC file and adding an alias there. If you're on most breeds of Linux, it'll still be that bash file. We've also included some instructions in the guide if you're on Windows for getting the alias set up. It doesn't matter how you get the alias set up. The end result is really the same there, that we can just execute the space and time CLI with a single command, just a little easier and cleaner to do. Please note that the version here should be adjusted to match the version that you downloaded of the space and time CLI. All right, and once that's complete, you can see, as we just did, the help file will be displayed directly without executing Java and all the jar in the path. A final step here on the prerequisites and setup, I just want to talk a little bit about environment variables. Hopefully you're familiar with environment variables. Inside your shell, these are a way to parameterize different variables so that we can use them more fluidly and in some cases more securely, right? So if we're dealing with a private key, we can load that up into our shell environment, and you don't have to constantly be saving it off into your command history. So with that, it's important to understand how environment variables work. I've given a couple examples in the guide itself, but keep that in mind. Okay, so let's do one example of setting an export or exporting an environment variable. Let's say that's the username we want to register, and we're going to load up. We can confirm that it's set now, something like that. Okay, I will show you a little trick later on about how we can load all of our environment variables at once through a file very easily. But as we're working through the guide, we're going to be just encountering some of these for the first time. So if you want to set your user ID now, that's fine. Otherwise, we'll do it in a second. That was mainly just an example. Now we're going to move on and out of the prerequisites and setup, and we're going to move on to register and authenticate. All right, now that we've got the space and time CLI set up, let's go ahead and register a user. This first command is actually going to authenticate and register the user at the same time. Before we run the command, I'm going to go ahead and set an environment variable for my new user ID of choice. Try something like that. Get that user ID set. This is just going to make it a little easier to run the commands. We've also got the API URL set as an environment variable there. And we have this join code. Join code should have come with your beta invite email. However, if it did not, you can send a request with an empty join code that will give you limited access to space and time. In this particular case, I have one set up for this demo, so I'm going to go ahead and grab that from my environment. You don't really need to worry about setting an environment variable for your join code, as you really just need it this one time. All right, that command was run successfully. We can see that we've registered a new user. We've been given a private public key pair. This private key is what you will use to authenticate into space and time. So you want to save that off into a password manager somewhere secure. Keep note of your public key as well, as we are going to need that, and the access token. So let's go ahead right now grab our access token, and we're going to create an environment variable, AT, to hold that one. Don't worry about the refresh token down the road. If you're programmatically incorporating space and time into your app, that is one that you will use to generate new access tokens every 30 minutes. But for the sake of getting started, we don't need to worry about that particular token. Okay, something else I want to point out before we move ahead. The command we just ran was enough to register and authenticate. Moving forward and down the road, obviously you aren't going to re-register every time. I'll just show you quickly the command there. That's going to be your login command. Again, you've got these saved off into your environment, and now you can just run that one command, and that's going to generate you an access token. All right, now that we've got our access token set up, we are going to go ahead and just jump in and run a query. Really pretty simple stuff here. We'll take the query in, and you can see we've provided the access token. The API URL, we've got this new one, which is the DQL. So the DQL is going to represent the endpoint in space and time that we are querying. And of course, I've used a slash to make this a little more easy to follow and readable. Essentially, that's just allowing us to drop the rest of that command down to a new line. We've got our resource ID. This is going to be schema.table. So the schema we're going to query is Ethereum, and the table is the blocks table. This is our public blockchain data. We're going to run our SQL text command, select star from ethereum.blocks. Let's go ahead and see what happens. So you can see very quickly we are returned a single block back from the Ethereum blockchain. And that's it. That's all you need to do to get registered, authenticated, and run your first query in space and time. Now that we've queried some existing blockchain data from space and time, the next logical step with the Getting Started guide is to go on to create a table of our own and insert some data into that table. There are a couple extra steps associated with that process that I'll talk about briefly, and then we'll jump in and execute some commands and walk through exactly how that works. First and foremost, you're going to need a schema to put your table in. It's a part of our resource ID. Really easy to run that command from the CLI and create a schema. You're also welcome to use the SE Playground schema that I'm using as well. The next step is creating a biscuit. Creating a biscuit is an important part of the process of decentralized authorization in space and time. So a biscuit essentially contains these facts with it, and you can see in this case we're adding these different permissions when we create the biscuit here, and we're going to say, hey, for this table, this biscuit is going to have the operations allowed of create, drop, insert, update, merge, and so on. So an important part, we're not going to go fully into biscuits. There's a lot of cool and interesting things to learn. I will say biscuits are created and maintained by an outside third party. It's an open source utility, so anyone can generate those, and there's a suite of different tools you can use. We do have a nice helper here in our CLI in case you just want to do it all in one place. The next step will be to create the actual table. You can see the SQL that we're going to be executing, a little nice visual of that SQL before we drop it into the command itself. And finally, once we've created the table, we're going to go ahead and just push some data in there and do a quick test to pull that data back. Let's get started. I have created just a simple document so I can grab these commands more easily. The first command we're going to run is going to be to create a biscuit associated with the SE Playground in this soon to be created guide table. As you can see, the CLI quickly generates 3 pieces of information: a public private key and the biscuit itself. It's really important to understand a couple points here. First, the public and private key are different than the user's public-private key pair. So this is separate public-private key pair. And with that, you want to keep this key, this private key, like others, private as well. So in a password manager, something like that. The next is that the biscuit itself, that long string of text that I've selected, is essentially going to give someone access to potentially create more biscuits for your table and or write data to that table, kind of depending on what operations you have set. So keep that biscuit private as well. I'm not going to actually use this one. That's why I can leave this on the screen. It isn't going to be available or usable once I create this table now. So let's go ahead and grab our next command. And with that one, we are going to go ahead and create the table. All right. You'll notice that I have parameterized a number of different resources here. Hopefully at this point, you're kind of picking up on the premise. We've got our biscuit public key from that last step. I didn't walk through setting that as an environment variable, but it should be implied. I hope that that's what you'll need to do. Same is going to go for the biscuit itself as well. So there's your biscuit in there. And then at the end, we can see our SQL statement we looked at briefly before, and our access type is set to public read. It's important to pay attention to what access type you set, and you can find more information about the different permissions you can set on your table in the documentation. Okay, and we can see success returned. We have created our new SE Playground guide table. And we'll go ahead and look at that next step, which will be to insert some data into the table. I'm going to grab that command for us. So you can see very basic insert statement. And we've updated one table. Let's check our last command here. We're just going to go ahead and select star from that playground guide table, and you can see the values that we just inserted. So there we have created a biscuit associated with a new table, given some different operations to that biscuit. We created a table, and we linked that biscuit to the table. And then we inserted some data, and we retrieved that data from the table. Now it's time to bring it all together. So we've gone through all the basic steps from registering, authenticating, creating tables, inserting data, and querying data. We've even queried some blockchain data and some of our own data. But the real magic is when we can bring it all together. So that's a join query that joins that off-chain data and our on-chain index data at the same time. So with that, we're going to look at an example of a table I created for a previous version of this guide. We've got our DApp user wallets. You can see that table here that is living in the SE Playground. Now, before we join the query, join the data together, I'm going to do a quick look at the data in that table, and then we'll run this more fun and interesting query where we're joining the data. And what we can see here on this join, essentially, we're looking at a given ERC20 token, and we're going to say, hey, which users in my DApp or my list of addresses held this particular SWISE token previous to this given block. So this is a common use case, right? If you're issuing an airdrop or you want to see who held your token, it's a notoriously difficult bit of information to get, and it's extremely powerful when you can combine it with your own data. So that's the logic or idea behind the query. Let's take a look at the query itself. First, I've got our query as promised of the DApp user wallets. This is just going to give us a feel for what the data looks like inside that table. So we've got a user wallet address and then a different subscription tag. Now, that query that we just looked at, the larger join query, we're going to take that one here and run it. Now, when you join both of these different data sets together, there's a lot of use cases that open up, right? And so not having to index that data on your own is extremely valuable, and having direct access. Now we can see that query returned our results here. In this particular case, we have a single user that held the SY's token on our list before that given block. So there you have it. That's just one look at how you can join user-generated data with our indexed on-chain blockchain data. Okay, so that wraps up our getting started guide. We've gone through, we've looked at the prerequisites of installing the space and time command line, running some different commands, queries, registering, authenticating. Now keep in mind, the space and time CLI is a wrapper around the API. So we've got inside the API reference here, you can get down into all the different functions that can be performed against the space and time API, whether you're talking about the different SQL APIs, or whether we're looking at some of the different streaming options, ways to get data into space and time. We've also got our dashboards, AIs, and different APIs and different things in there as well. So be sure to check that out as you're digging deeper in. And we have recently released our SDKs as well. So if you're looking to integrate space and time into your application, one of these different SDKs could be a great option. We've got a Golang, Node.js, and a Python SDK. All right, enjoy, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us on Discord if you have any questions or need assistance in getting started with space and time.